There are two stories about the origin of the universe in the book of Genesis. In this new year of the narrative lectionary, we take up the second story, which tells us about two animals called simply man and woman, created from the fertile soil of the world that was already made, in order to serve it by tilling and watching that soil. This is a story about choice and consequence, and the human impulse to test boundaries and limits. A reading from the book of Genesis, chapter 2, verses 4b through 7 and 15 through 17, and chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. This reading is from The Message. You are invited to follow along in the downloadable scripture readings booklet or in your own Bible. This is the story of how it all started, of heaven and earth when they were created. At the time God made earth and heaven, before any grasses or shrubs had sprouted from the ground, God hadn't yet set rain on earth, nor was there anyone around to work the ground. The whole earth was watered by underground springs. God formed man out of dirt from the ground and blew into his nostrils the breath of life. The man came alive, a living soul. God took the man and set him down in the Garden of Eden to work the ground and keep it in order. God commanded the man, "You can eat from any tree in the garden, except from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Don't eat from it. The moment you eat from that tree, you're dead." The serpent was clever, more clever than any wild animal God had made. He spoke to the woman. "Do I understand that God told you not to eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "Not at all. We can eat from the trees in the garden. It's only about the tree in the middle of the garden that God said, 'Don't eat from it. Don't even touch it or you'll die.'" The serpent told the woman, "You won't die. God knows that the moment you eat from that tree, you'll see what's really going on. You'll be just like God, knowing everything, ranging all the way from good to evil." When the woman saw that the tree looked like good eating and realized what she would get out of it, she'd know everything, she took and ate the fruit, and then gave some to her husband, and he ate. Immediately, the two of them did see what's really going on, saw themselves naked. They sewed fig leaves together as makeshift clothes for themselves. When they heard the sound of God strolling in the garden in the evening breeze, the man and his wife hid in the trees of the garden, hid from God. Well, hello. Welcome to my campfire. It's the beginning of another year of the narrative lectionary, the year of Luke. We'll be telling stories from the Bible all this fall and winter, and through those stories, we'll be listening for clues to how God works in the creation. I've kind of hated to let summer go, so I hope you don't mind we're around the fire today. It's a time to tell stories. It's a time to make space for wonder. It's a time to catch an insight if we're lucky. Seems like a good time to talk about Evel Knievel. Yes, Evel Knievel, the man with the red, white, and blue lycra jumpsuit who attempted really dangerous stunts on motorcycles. The same Robert Craig Knievel who found his way onto television screens and hospital admitting lists all during the 1960s and 1970s. Evel Knievel started out doing a number of odd jobs, but found his calling when he jumped a motorcycle over a 20-foot box of rattlesnakes and a mountain lion. Well, really, his rear wheel technically hit the box of rattlesnakes, but he still landed safely. He went on to jumping his motorcycle over cars as the part of kind of show that tours county fairs in the summertime. Evel Knievel had a pattern. He would jump over, say, 10 cars and do it safely, but then would add a car, have a disastrous spill, and get a break in the hospital. He was good enough that he jumped over 12 cars and 18 buses and various other objects that people dared him to jump. And Evel Knievel could have stopped there, and maybe he should have, because he wasn't always so successful. The Guinness World Records organization lists him to this day as the human to suffer the most broken bones in a lifetime. His number was 433. Maybe all those broken bones should have told him something, but they didn't. He had his sights set on something bigger, the Snake River Canyon in Idaho. He had a special motorcycle built for it, one with a steam-powered jet to power him across the chasm. And maybe he would have done it too, except that his parachute deployed just as he was launching and slowed his motorcycle in flight. The winds pushed him back from his target, and he landed on the shore just a few feet from where he had started. So why did Robert Knievel do what he did? A journalist asked him that question in an interview that was published at his death in 2007. He said, "Well, you can't ask a guy like me why I performed. I really wanted to fly through the air. I was a daredevil, a performer. All those things made me Evel Knievel. Sure, I was scared. You're in the air for 4 seconds, you're part of the machine, and then if you make a mistake midair, you say to yourself, oh boy, I'm going to crash, and there's nothing you can do to stop it, not at all." In the end, being Evel Knievel meant always pushing the boundaries of what was safe and sensible, the boundaries of what others thought was possible. It meant pushing all those boundaries for the sake of having those 4 seconds in the air. Boundaries and conventions and what others think is possible, that's a good topic for today. We are living in a time when no boundary seems sacred and no convention seems immune to challenge. We find our technology being used to reach into our homes, our minds, our wallets, our hearts and emotions at any hour of the day or night. We are stunned to read certain words in newspapers and hear them on television, words that would have gotten our mouths washed out with soap had we uttered them as children, words we still hesitate to use in public. The lines between work and home and education and home are blurred and wearisome. We don't know if our health is endangered when we go out, or if our job is endangered when we stay home. We find ourselves teaching our children, caring for our children, engaging our children day after day until there is no distinction between the days of the week, between weekday and weekend, between work day and Sabbath day. And when we look to the outside, we see people doing things that we would have dismissed as delusional fantasy a few short months ago. We see politicians ignoring or normalizing dissembling behavior, lying. We see ordinary people like us, rising up against common sense health precautions like wearing masks in public. We see the wish expressed that marginalized and impoverished and dependent members of our society would simply disappear and stop draining the energy and attention of the successful people. All of that brings up emotions and impulses that startle us, that look and feel strange. Perhaps you've been feeling lonely or resentful that you can't visit friends freely. Or perhaps you are actively angry about the bizarre ways in which your life has suddenly changed shape, the new things that life is demanding of you, the things for which you never prepared, because who would expect that? Underneath it all is the eternal question. What does it all mean? How did we get here? Well, let's just say that the sages of Israel had a reason for telling the origin story that we've taken up today. The story itself is about creatures living among other creatures and given a simple charge in a fabulous locale. And who wouldn't want to be a caretaker in the Garden of Eden? Adam in Hebrew is just a generic term for a man. The man is given breath from God and charged to take care of the Chadamah, the ground. A helper is brought into existence alongside the man. Now, in the sage's story, she is not subservient in any way. She works alongside the man, sharing the work of tending the ground equally and relieving the loneliness of being for each other. The two, woman and man, have the task of serving as caretakers for the other animals and plants and the soil from which they sprang. It's a beautiful and harmonious setting to which they have been called, and they have almost free rein to enjoy its many delights in their work. Almost free rein. There is one single boundary in their existence. It takes just a nudge from the serpent to raise the urge to jump a motorcycle over it. The tree of knowledge of good and evil is promoted as death-bringing. You can be forgiven for thinking that its fruit is poisonous. But there's death, and there's death. The serpent's question is like a promoter mentioning to Evel Knievel that, gee, there's this line of Pepsi trucks over here that no one has ever jumped. The promise of something on the other side, the promise of knowing something they don't know, is too compelling. And so both the woman and the man eat the fruit of the tree. It turns out that it's easy to call us away from paradise, and following that call opens a world of complication. The storytellers point out one immediate consequence. The two become painfully self-aware. They become aware of their nakedness, aware of the differences between them, aware of the reality that they look different from every other creature with which they had coexisted until now. But there is another consequence. Knowing the difference between good and evil is not the same as controlling either good or evil. They are no longer floating free in this world. Now they're living in it and making choices that have consequences for good or ill. The story goes on past the part we heard today. It illustrates what was unleashed by eating the fruit of the tree. Shame and regret, pain and mortality, envy and anger, all become part of the world of Adam and helper. Their separation from the garden that had been their charge is just one small consequence of their newfound consciousness. And here we are, on a day of new beginnings as we live into our new reality. Maybe those emotions, those impulses that have grabbed you, grabbed me, start to make a little more sense. When everything around us seems to be falling apart and we can't do much about it, of course we feel confused and angry. When we really start to appreciate the truth of the saying, I can never unsee that, of course we experience shock and wonder where we've landed. When we chafe at the work we are doing, at the loneliness we are enduring, at the indignities when we are suffering, at the dread just beneath the surface, when we chafe at those things, of course it's related to our cognizance of how things could be, how things were different. One thing I think this story tells us is that boundaries are not made to be broken, and not every convention needs challenging just because it's a convention. The stories we will hear in the weeks ahead often involve boundaries and conventions. Abraham and Sarai, Moses and Aaron, Joseph and Pharaoh, all confronted boundary challenges in their lives. It all comes back to the same thing. Our common lot as humans is to be taken by our curiosity, a curiosity that leads us to wonder, What's over that fence? But our survival and our harmonious existence depends on maintaining certain boundaries. The integrity of our neighbor, that's a boundary. The dignity of our neighbor, that's a boundary. The humanity of our neighbor, that's a big boundary. We have a charge and a gift that comes down to us from the beginning of our existence. In the storyteller's reckoning, God's breath was infused into each and every one of us. Our charge is to recognize and respect that breath of life in each other. Our gift is to accept our role as nurturers of the whole creation. Well, this fire needs a little tending and it's getting dark. Almost time to call it a day and turn in. I know that when we leave this campfire, we have work to do. When you go back, I hope you'll reach out to a neighbor, a friend, a family member, a colleague. I hope you'll recognize the tough time they've been through. I hope you'll thank them for simply being who they are. I hope you'll take a silent moment to honor the breath of God that lives in them. And if you don't have someone to do those things for you, know that your integrity and dignity and humanity has been recognized and honored since ancient times in stories like this. Know that your family of faith, this family of faith, appreciates you for who you are. And to know that God's breath lives in you for the beauty of creation. Amen.